And welcome to another edition of the X Zone, everyone. I am Rob McConnell, and we're coming to you from our broadcast center and studios in beautiful Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. If you would like to send me an email, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, on all social media sites, Xzone Radio TV. To find out about the programming available to you 24/7, 365 on the X Zone Broadcast Network, visit our website at xzbn.net. And for the schedule of the X Zone TV channel exclusively on Simul TV, visit www.simultv.com. Exonation, my guest this hour is KRISTY Robinette, and we're going to be talking about KRISTY's new book entitled Journey to the Afterlife. Joining me now from the beautiful state of Michigan, just up the Great Lakes from Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, is KRISTY Robinette. And KRISTY, welcome to the X Zone.
Yay, thank you so much for having me.
KRISTY, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, I am from, like you said, the Detroit, Michigan area.
Yep.
I actually was born and raised in Detroit, unlike Eminem, who says he was, or Kid Rock. I actually was. My address was the 313. But yeah, right. So I have to put that out there all the time.
Of course.
I was raised in a parochial upbringing, and but I was also born as a medium. I was able to see those that had crossed over onto the other side and those that had not. And being raised in that type of a household, you know, being kind of laughed at that what I was experiencing was imaginary, was an interesting, experience. And so here I am, 40 plus years later and talking about it. And it's so great, like shows like yours that allow us to kind of come out of the closet.
It's funny because throughout history, people have been talking about conversations with the dead, seeing the dead. And I, for one, cannot understand what took it so long in order to be accepted. For example, the main religious philosophies of the world are based on death.
It's true. I mean, even in the Bible, Jesus died and came back as what his disciples referred to as a ghost.
That's right. And
absolutely.
And Jesus brought Lazarus back from the dead. So,
Yeah, it's fear.
Yeah.
I've always classified it as, the death and the afterlife, that unknown equates into just that fear. And we're such a conversationalized, or at least we try to be conversationalized society now, that we do have all these different opportunities to, have these, deep conversations where it was women were, in one room and men were in the other smoking a cigar, for a long time. So that we were probably having those conversations, just not with one another.
I remember when I moved to Ontario from Montreal, where I'm originally from, you would go into a tavern and there was a room for men and a room for ladies. And I'm saying, what the heck's going on here? Shouldn't we all be together, enjoying ourselves, talking to each other? And anyway, thankfully that did happen. But, I appreciate the Irish because what they do is they celebrate the life of the dearly departed instead of mourning, because mourning is more or less for those who are left behind. Whereas the Irish say, hey, let's say it's Joe Flanagan's wake. Let's celebrate his life.
It's true. And I actually am Irish descent. So maybe that was the curse of the mediumship with me, is I have Irish on both sides of my family. So I'm pretty much 80% Irish. But you go to New Orleans, here in the States, and they celebrate. They have a parade. They have a party. And I recently went to a funeral of a loved one, and they did the same thing. Everyone got up and they talked about the funniest experiences that they had with the person that had, crossed over. And we laughed. And not once did I think that it was disrespectful. Not once.
No, neither do I. I think what it does is it shows more respect than everybody moping, because you're not this is just my opinion. When you're at a wake and everybody's sad, you're sad because you are going to miss that person. That person has gone to where everybody is going to go anyway.
It's true. And I had I've never talked about this experience. Probably a decade ago, a client of mine, her brother had passed in a really horrific car accident.
Oh, no.
And and I try to be there for my clients. And so I went, nobody likes to go to a funeral,
No.
or a funeral home. And then here I am, I can actually see them and sense them. And some of them need help to cross over. So it's kind of work for me, but in a selfish way. But so I had gone, and as I didn't know anybody other than my client, and I watched her brother in spirit, look at the people looking at him in the casket and kind of finding their little cliques together and having their conversations. And he would look over at me and he'd be like, they got that story completely wrong, and it was kind of hysterical to afterwards, kind of pull my client aside and give her the lowdown of her brother, sort of crashing his own
Sure.
funeral. And she loved it, and they ended up sharing with the friends and the family the things that were said with it. But that gave me kind of a eagle's eye view with how those on the other side actually view their own wake. And they do. They're like, why are you crying? I realize that you're sad and I'm not here,
Yes.
but I'm still here. I really am still here. And that's the reason why I started writing the books. That's the reason why I kind of came out of that psychic medium closet, is to bring not just comfort, but my sessions and hopefully the books, they're just not cry fests, but you also laugh and you think as well through it.
So would you say that was your prime motivation for writing your book?
It is one of my prime motivations, and this is going to sound completely hypocritical, is I started to see this influx of these mediums and psychics and new age people come on board and be ambulance chasers for those that were grieving and charging outrageous amounts of money. Now we should all, get paid,
Sure.
we should all be able to pay our bills and, and all of that. So I do, so I don't want anybody, saying you really are hypocritical because you charge for a reading. Well, I do, but you don't have to charge $1,000 for 30 minutes or $5,000 for 10 minutes. Like I started to see this influx of, and when I started writing, I want the everyday person who maybe can't afford or is afraid to get a session to be able to learn how to connect with their loved one on the other side. And it's not that complicated. And I've been doing it since I was 3. So, I don't think that I know it all, but I know what I know. And so I started writing in the way that I hoped that they'd be able to learn something and maybe find that comfort through their grief and find their ability to be able to connect with their loved one without paying thousands of stupid dollars to do it, which I think is just ridiculous. It's just, it's like I said, it's ambulance chasing.
It's a crime.
It really is.
Yeah. Because...
And I see this horrible, I've seen people in my field, which I'm embarrassed to say, go through the obituaries, go to the funeral homes,
that's tacky.
Call these people or send them brochures. And these people that are desperate, that are grieving, they fall for it because they're in that moment. And I typically say, wait a year before you see any medium because of that. You have to go on in with a straight head.
I've been doing this show now for 29 years. And I'll tell you something, I've seen it go from a show of interest, a show of education, and watching the different influx of paranormal investigators, Bigfoot investigators, psychic mediums, tarot card readers. This genre has turned into a cash cow.
Absolutely. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry.
It is. It truly is. And it's amazing that, Barnum must be looking down and saying, see, I told you there was one born every minute.
Right. Yeah. And I go from not necessarily it being a cash cow, but loving the idea that more people, like I said, are kind of coming out, but also hating the idea because it really honestly does become a 3-ring circus.
Yeah. Well, we've got to take a commercial break very shortly. But what I've seen is that the majority of psychics, mediums, tarot card readers, what they are, they're not anything else but actors, because they really have no idea what they're doing except what they read in books.
Yeah, I agree. Unfortunately, here I am in the industry and I'm like, I agree with you. So I don't want to sound like the elite one, but I do. I agree with you.
You and I have to take our break. Please stand by. KRISTY Robinette is our special guest this hour. She's the author of Journey to the Afterlife. And her website is KRISTYROBINETTE.com. That's KRISTYROBINETT.com. And Kristy and I will return on the other side of this break as we continue investigating the world of the paranormal, the science of parapsychology, and the Oscar goes to, well, certainly not us because we're down to earth people. Wow, you know what? Cash cow, actors, frauds, charlatans, gypsies, tramps, and thieves. We'll be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away. My guest of this hour, Exonation, is Kristy Robinette. And before we came back on air, I was telling Kristy that way back when we used to do the psychic fairs, we used to go to the UFO congresses or whatever they're called, the New Age symposiums, and we stopped going. I refused to go because what I saw were people who were desperately looking for answers. 95% of these answers they could have easily found themselves if they just would have taken the time and thought about it. But they would come in and they would go from psychic to psychic to psychic to psychic, and they'd stop, and you'd watch them walk out. And it took me a little while to understand what was going on. Was they'd go from psychic to psychic to psychic to psychic to psychic until they heard what they wanted to hear, and then they'd leave. And I just think that's wrong. I really do. And
well, and disappointment comes from that, because when I start my sessions, I often say, you may hate me, by the end of this. You may, because I'm not going to tell you what you want to hear.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you what you're supposed to hear. And hopefully that puts you on the path to get you to where you want to hear, to where you need to be. But it's not always that easy, quick, fix.
Right.
And it's like, I don't know if you remember when The Secret came out,
whole
when Oprah and The Secret, and you wish it and it's going to happen, and all of that. It's very similar. I mean, they really kind of, took that metaphysical, element to, and I had employees at the time. I was working in the corporate world, and I had employees that were quitting their jobs, and I was doing the mediumship. I was working with the police at the time, on cases, on unsolved cold cases, and I didn't want my employer to know. So I'm doing that, and I'm kind of working in the field on the side, on the down low, and I was working human resources in corporate world, which I was utilizing the intuitive side, but I couldn't say grandma's in back of you and telling you,
sure,
you need to go get a certification. So I had to, I kind of was lying in my corporate world, to be honest. But so I was seeing, as The Secret came out, that my employees were quitting their jobs because they just felt like, I'm going to quit, and if I believe that I'm going to be able to do great things, that's all I'm going to do. And I had one friend that bought this huge house and bought this brand new truck, and I'm like, you don't even have a job. What are you doing? And she's like, I believe in The Secret. I believe that if I believe that's what's going to happen. And of course, the house got taken away a year later, and the truck was repoed 3 months later. And so it's the same thing with this sort of genre, is that you have to have common sense.
Yeah, but you see, the thing that The Secret never told you was they kept the biggest secret to themselves.
They were keeping the biggest money. Yeah.
Not only that, but they forgot to tell you that, sure, you can get anything you want, but you have to work for it. It just won't pop up in your driveway if you want a Ferrari and you've got Ferraris plastered all over your house.
Nope, there's intention that has to happen. And there's action that really has to happen. Yeah. And unfortunately, nobody wants to work anymore. Everybody wants, that easy paycheck. And even this industry, I'm surprised, because I teach psychic awareness classes, and all after I've taught, a 3-hour class, everyone's like, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to do what you do. And I don't want to sound again like the elite, but I'm like, it takes way more than a 3-hour class.
Exactly.
To be able to do this. There's a lot more involved, including business, that's connected with that. And, and then they come back, 3 months later, and they're like, I got to look for a real job because I can't do your job. It's exhausting. and my clients are mad at me because what I'm telling them isn't true, and or I'm telling them what they want to know,
Yeah.
or I can't connect to their loved ones, or what have you. And everyone's looking for the easy paycheck.
Well, when clients do come to you, is there a set group of questions that you hear time after time after time?
A lot of times, and again, it goes back to why I wrote the
Mm-hmm.
books, was that, what are the signs that my loved ones are sending me?
Right.
And I get a lot of the whole, what is my guide's name? I kind of laugh because it always reminds me of Sylvia Brown on Montel
Oh
Williams
boy.
with that, or what was I in a past life?
Mm-hmm.
Because in Sylvia's world, everybody was royalty. Nobody was the peasant, everybody was a king, so, or a queen. But, so I always, I try to stay, because they don't know it. They're excited. The
Oh,
clients are
well,
excited.
well,
And
I got to
I
tell.
try not to be disrespectful
I've got to
with
tell you
it.
this about Sylvia Brown. Okay, I we had her booked 3 months after she died. Like,
Interesting.
how come she didn't know she was going to die?
Uh, I have a Sylvia Brown story. So I was working police cases
Mm-hmm.
at the time, and I still do, but at the time it was really, I was doing a lot. I was probably overwhelmed. Well, she also was called on a police case here in the States
Mm-hmm.
that I was called on, and the police said, there was a child that was kidnapped at a bus stop. And they're like, where is he? What should we do? And she went, oh, no hurry, because he's dead. He's gone. We're looking for a body now, is what we're doing. And they went to me, and I said, he's alive, and we only have not long, because I don't see this boy being killed, but I kept seeing somebody else being killed. And they looked at me like I was strange. And I said, I'm going to draw you a map, because this is where he's at. And I drew them a map, and they go, I don't know, KRISTY, Sylvia Brown says this.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, well, I'm just telling you what I see. This isn't a competition. It's just not. Well, they ended up, Sylvia wanted me to do a cruise of hers.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I'll think about it. And this was during the same time. And she ended up, I was right. They ended up finding this boy and another boy that had been kidnapped, I think 2 years previous. And the kidnapper was actually going to kill that other boy because he had gotten too
Oh.
old for him. And so they were like, well, we were listening to Sylvia, and we're so sorry. And Sylvia was so mad at me that I
Mm-hmm.
was right, that she's like, I want nothing else to do with you. You are not going to be part of my cruise. So
Oh, boo
I
hoo
was
hoo.
canceled on her cruise. So, and then she passed away. So
How come these people don't know when they're going to die? Like, why would they say, all right, yeah, sure, okay, and we booked it. Let's say that
yeah.
we booked her in January to come on the show in June.
I will say, though, that I don't want to know when I'm going to pass, and I
Mm-hmm.
don't want any client that comes to me. It's not my job to
Yeah.
be the Grim Reaper and to hand over expiration dates. It's just something that I feel we're supposed to, even as mediums, we're supposed to live in the now.
Yeah.
And if we're so caught up in the past or in the future, because a lot of times these mediums get very sick. A lot of them don't live long life. She actually lived a very long life for being a psychic, because we're so caught up in the in between. So I'm dealing with death all day, every day, and I have to make myself intentionally connect to the now, and with my kids and my husband
So
and my dad.
how do you
and
balance
pets.
it? How do you balance this between the living, the dead, and do you ever get any peace? Because I'm sure when you go out and you're traveling with your family, or you go to the local mall, these spirits must know that you have the ability to see and hear them. And how do you kind of say, look, guys, I'm off. Leave me alone.
I don't really know how to do that, and that's probably my problem. That's probably my problem. I can tune it down
Mm-hmm.
most of the time, but I can't turn it off, and probably that's a good thing. But I try to set boundaries like I would with people. Like social media. Right now I've got all these messages from people who are like, can you give me a free reading? So even to the other side, I'm like, I want to help you. I really do.
Mm-hmm.
That is something that I think is my job, along with helping the police. I volunteer. It's unpaid. And, and I want to help these lost souls and these spirits to tell their stories. But there's a place and a time, and I have to have the business hours that are open. And a lot of times those business hours are my nighttime. So I think even in Journey, I talk about how my nighttime is a lot like being at the Secretary of State or the DMV, so it's like take a
Hmm.
number and there's only so many, that I allow per night or per week.
Do you get a peaceful night's sleep?
Rarely.
Really? Eh?
Yeah, rarely. And thankfully, my husband is very understanding of that. And, if I'm wandering around or if I'm,
Hmm.
eyes wide, wide open, he puts the earplugs in, puts the blanket over his head. He's got a
Yeah.
CPAP machine on. He's dead to the world most of the time. So he's like, whatever, you do you. It's
Oh,
good.
wow.
But no, not a lot of peace. I don't. And I like my sleep. I do.
Who doesn't? Who doesn't?
Right. Right.
Do you find that the dearly departed on the other side also infiltrate your dreams?
Yeah, a lot of times, even if I do like paranormal investigations,
Hmm.
they'll come to me the night before and kind of tell me where I'm going to go and who's going to be there and the experiences. I had that recently at an old mobster type of a location that was very well known for some criminal activity. And so the night before, I had some dreams with the people that were going to visit me there in spirit. So
Oh.
it's actually kind of my friends say I'm a cheater because I get like the cheat sheet the night before. and I used to do that with school too.
Ew.
There would never be a pop quiz in my world or a snow day. I would know when to turn
Wow.
the alarm off.
Well, something we have here in my world is called a commercial break with the news, and that's what we have to take right now. But you knew that because they already told you that a few seconds ago.
Exactly.
KRISTY, stand by. Exonation KRISTY Robinette is our very special guest. KRISTY is in the Detroit, Michigan area. Her website is www.kristyrobinette.com, and she is the author of Journey to the Afterlife. And KRISTY and I will be back on the other side of this break with the news as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, on the X Zone Broadcast Network, iHeartRadio, Mutual Broadcast Network, Talkstar Radio, Simul Radio, and Simul TV. Whatever you do, don't go away. We'll be back shortly. Exonation, my guest this hour is KRISTY Robinette. Her website is KRISTYRobinette.com. She's the author of Journey to the Afterlife. And KRISTY, how can those who have a legitimate reason for trying to communicate with someone who has departed, how do they know who to trust with this very personal and very, very private communication that they want to give across? How do you know who the charlatans are? How does anybody know these days with the internet? All it takes is a domain name, a website, and away you go.
Yeah, I think that the best is just like if you're looking for a good plumber,
Hmm.
is to ask for recommendations.
Yeah, but there's no Angie's List for psychics or
No,
mediums.
there's not. And I actually worked in the Michigan area
Hmm.
to work on licensing or at least registration.
Right?
And the state was like, that's just too involved.
Really?
And I kept saying, do you know how much money we would be able to rebuild our roads
Yeah.
if that happened? Because if you had to register, there was just no way for them to monitor that, though. But I was all for it because they can come out of the woodworks, like I said, after three hours,
Hmm.
of a psychic. But there really is. There really isn't anything other than you can trust your gut instinct. If it feels like a charlatan, it probably is. If it feels like a witch doctor,
Yeah, but
it probably is.
But unfortunately, people who are at that point in their life where they're looking for answers from the other side, they're desperate. Logic and reasoning does not fit into
You're
the
right.
equation.
You're right. I have a list when I was trying to look for it really quick and I can't find it on my computer. In one of my books, and it's not Journey, I think it's the one previous to that. I actually have a list of things that you should look at to search out somebody who is, worthwhile for you to go. But I still think, even the recommendations, when I've had people say, can you do a test reading on me? And I'm like, no,
Yeah.
I would love to have the time for that. I just don't. I think that it's, looking at their values, because just like that doctor might become, well recommended to somebody, you go to that doctor and you're like, I do not like that doctor. I don't like what he
Exactly.
stands for. I don't like what his ideas are. And it doesn't necessarily mean that that doctor's a terrible person. He's just not matched to your
Hmm.
vibration. So it's sometimes it is, interviewing. I've had people say, well, that they don't like me. And
No
that hurts my
way.
feelings.
No
I know it
way.
hurts my feelings.
Hey, it hurt my feelings
Um,
to hear that too.
but especially anytime I put
Hmm.
out a book on heaven, I get a lot of controversy, which I always think is really interesting. I was on another radio show and I always get hate mail after that radio show, and it's always because I'm talking about heaven, and it's like I'm so confused.
Why? Why would anybody send you hate mail because of heaven?
It's something that really honestly baffles my mind. I think that because some people, not all people, some people are looking for the proof. And I can only give you the experiences or the messages
Wait a
that
sec. Hold on
I've
here. Hold on here.
received.
Hold on here. They're looking for the proof of heaven or the proof that you
The
actually.
proof of heaven. No, the proof of
Oh,
heaven.
wait a sec. Wait a sec. Wait a sec. How can they get proof of heaven when they can't even get proof of God?
Well, that's just it.
Yeah.
And I talk about that, and I talk about near death experiences. That's the only so-called
Hmm.
proof that you're going to get. But we go into this world with blind faith. We go out of this world with blind faith, if we even keep the faith.
Hmm.
So I kind of think that sometimes, I don't know, that they believe that I have this magic potion and I'm holding it on. I'm holding it close to me and I'm not sharing everything. And it's just so interesting, the emails that I get, from, we completely went off on a tangent and I am so sorry.
It's all
Um,
right.
but it's so interesting because what one person, like I said,
Hmm.
is going to think is valid,
Yeah.
another person is not going to think that.
Hey,
We're a crazy society.
yeah, and on this show, if we go off on tangents, there's usually a good reason for doing it. So, this is a conversation between two people. Like, we don't have a
Right.
script. You know?
Right. We're not actors. It goes right back to the beginning of
Exactly.
what we were saying.
Exactly. How hard is it?
Yeah.
How hard is it for you as a mom to deal with a case where there's a child involved? And how do you keep that distance?
It's horrific. The child cases are probably the toughest. They're the
Hmm.
ones that have changed me in many different dimensions. And instead of numbing me, I think that they push me forward, more, and I value my family even more when I go through that. There was one case that a little girl was taken from her couch, in the dead of night, and was found the next day brutally
Oh
murdered,
my gosh.
and found in only 3 years old, and found in a river. And I was brought in on the case. This was actually a really interesting case because I was originally brought in by the defense attorney of somebody that was being, prosecuted for the crime. And I had so much information that they didn't trust me, and they ended up turning me over to the They turned me over to the prosecuting attorney, and um, it was good because I ended up helping the defense get off, and so that they could focus on the person that was supposed to be charged. So it was a positive that they did that. But I could still remember the detective and I standing next to the grave of this little girl and just sobbing, and me going home and staring at my kids who were little at the time, and just so, grateful. But if you ever want to wonder if there's evil in the world, there's your proof.
Yeah. I saw much of that when I was on the police force myself, so I understand exactly what you're talking about.
And you yourself know, this detective ended up retiring soon after,
Hmm.
because it was something that truly damaged him
Yeah.
in many different ways. And he just couldn't handle it. He ended up going into politics, of all things, afterwards, because he still felt like he wanted to make a change in the world. But he said he could never do another child case
Yeah.
again, ever.
When you're being contacted by those on the other side, is there usually a time period when they try to make contact with people on this side, or it just happens when it happens.
Yeah, there's no fast and hard rule with
Hmm.
that. I've had people who have received a message from their loved one before they even knew that their loved one had passed away. So they had that visit, or they even had that phone call from them, only for them to receive a phone call or contact right after that person had suddenly passed away that night before or such. um a lot of times I say wait about 6 months earthly time
Hmm.
for that message, just to let them get acclimated to the other side. It's sort of like they're moving clear cross country, and they have to figure out what they want to do, and they have to unpack, and they have to kind of get used to that altitude as well in the communication, because they don't have vocal cords in
Yeah.
order to communicate with us. And then we have to grieve too. So, and the first thing, the easiest way is for them to visit with us in our dreams. And what often happens when we lose somebody we love is we don't sleep, or we take a sleeping aid or alcohol or pills, or something that numbs us, and so they
Yeah.
can't get through. It's a lot like plexiglass between the two of
Hmm.
the griever and the one on the other side.
According to those that you've communicated with on the other side, what happens at the moment of death?
It depends. We kind of get a choice. And we've seen this from those that have had near death experiences and have come back.
Hmm.
And I've seen this from those souls that have crossed over, those that are in the in between still, that they say that, they have that bright white light. Some say they go up a staircase, some say they don't go down a staircase, some say they go through a doorway. So everyone kind of has their own peaceful experience, whatever brings them that peace. And then they're pretty much given a choice if they want to cross over into that realm of that unknown with blind faith. Those that do, they go to their afterlife. Those that don't, kind of get stuck in what I call the in between, and some call it purgatory.
So how do they get from the in-between or purgatory to where they should be? And where is that place? If they didn't want to cross into or go to the bright light, and they decided to go to purgatory instead, is there a routine, or is there a way that they can finish what they wanted to stay behind for, and
Yeah,
then
that
later?
unfinished
Yeah.
business. Yeah, they can. I mean, they definitely can try to, talk or
Hmm.
communicate with their loved one. This is why the line is so long, in my bedroom, because a lot of them have unfinished business, with regards to that. And I don't do the ambulance chasing. So
Yeah.
I have had, I've had a couple where it's been like a 911 case where I've had a spirit say, "This is my loved one, and I'm worried that they're going to commit suicide, or they're going to end their life, and so I need you to call them." There's been a couple handful of times where I have done that. It's not like the doll, or the note that I left is here, or the
Right.
money's in the wall. It's none of that. But it's more the 911 cases. So those are the unfinished business. And there's always a light on in a funeral home,
Hmm.
and there's always a light on in a hospital. So, they can cross over. They don't necessarily need a medium to do that. And eventually they do. But we see that a lot in like larger, like the 9/11s,
Okay,
or
KRISTY, we've got to
the
take our
war.
break. Please stand by. Explanation. KRISTY Robinette is our guest, and KRISTY and I will be back on the other side of this break as we wrap up this hour here in the X Zone, talking about Journey to the Afterlife, and that is the name of KRISTY's book. And once again, her website is KRISTYRobinette.com. I'm Rob McConnell. This is the X Zone. Don't go away. KRISTY Robinette is my guest this hour. Nation. Her website is www.KRISTYRobinette.com, and that's KRISTYRobinett.com. And the name of her book is A Journey to the Afterlife. First of all, KRISTY, thank you so much for being on the show with me. This hour has gone fast. We'll have to have you back on in the near future, because we have yet so much to discuss. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
In your book, KRISTY, the Journey to the Afterlife, you talk about hell. Is hell like it is supposed to be as described by religion?
Not exactly.
Hmm.
Hell is definitely a darker place, but it's very much like if anyone has gone through that deep depression,
Mm-hmm.
that sadness where you just don't feel, as if you can move forward
Yeah.
any longer. Hell is a bit more in your head, you know, dark rather than taking coal and shooting it into the coal mine.
Well, something that people forget, and that is they think that grief is only at a time of death. But grief comes with many other parts of life. Grief comes when you move, believe it or not, from one place to another. What
Hmm.
some people call stress is or anxiety is actually grief. Making new friends, believe it or not, starting a new job, losing your job, going through a divorce, a separation. There are so many ways that the body and the mind, the soul and the heart have to contend with these changes, and 95% of these changes are totally unexpected, and we suffer grief. What is your suggestion as someone who deals with this on a daily basis, if not hourly basis? What is the best way to handle grief? What is the best way to get yourself back on track?
Yeah, it's surprising that people are surprised
Mm-hmm.
that grief is associated with joy as much as it is with sadness. It's the Catholic Church, they smudge between masses, whether it's a wedding
Yeah.
or whether it's a funeral, they cleanse that energy because we don't do that enough, in our normal life. So what do we do? What should we do is honestly kind of shut the world off every once in a while. There's that whole saying that your computer electronics will work better, if you unplug them and plug
Mm-hmm.
them back in. We need to do that to
Reboot.
ourselves. We do.
Yeah.
We need to do the control alt delete every once in a while. Clear out all of those brain tabs and start all over again. And that sometimes is exactly what we're missing in our life. We're so consumed with all of life's everything that we need, people cringe,
Mm-hmm.
when you hear this M word, is to meditate, but it doesn't have to be the whole yoga, thing. It can just simply be taking a walk
Yep.
or going to a concert or going to dinner with friends and keeping the phone in your purse or your pocket. So it really honestly is just kind of going back to the simple times.
I meditate every night, except I don't do it in the traditional way where with the way that people associate with meditation. What I do when I get home at around 3 o'clock in the morning is I grab myself a glass of water and I go into the living room and I sit there with all the lights off. And that's my time. And
That's
I just
perfect.
sit there and purge everything that's happened during the day. And if you were to ask me tomorrow morning, well, most of the time who my guests were the night before, I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, I do that with my
Yeah.
clients as well. I do what's called a brush off.
Mm-hmm.
And I go and I rinse my hands with water
Yeah.
and I envision all of that energy just going down the drain and it being helped, like whatever energy that needs to be healed and loved, that's doing that, but that I'm not carrying it anymore.
You know,
And I didn't do that for a long, long time and I suffered for it.
I don't, I do that not because I want to forget who my guests are, because the
Right.
next day, I'll find, everything will work itself out. But when you're doing 5 shows a night, 4 guests a night, that's 20 guests a night, 80 guests a week, 80 guests
It's a
a, yeah,
lot.
no, wait a minute, that's 80 guests a month. I'm sorry. It's just overload.
Yeah, and I don't do it to forget them either.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't necessarily forget them, but I just don't carry all of the content and the energy
Well,
with
that was a
me.
nice way to put it. I like that.
Yeah, you're like, who are you again? Just
All right, my guest this hour is. I'm sorry, your name again is. Yeah, no, we don't do it. We don't
right.
do it that way. We don't do it that way. But you just have to have some me time, and I think that's what meditation does. It allows you to have that me time that you weren't afforded to, or weren't afforded during the day because of everything else that you have to do.
No, we're tethered to
Yeah.
everything, our phones, our laptops, our everything we can't even eat a meal without updating everybody what we're eating.
Hmm.
It's ridiculous. And we wonder why we're such a society of stress and anxiety and jealousy and bullying, because it's constantly a life filled with comparisons, and to connect to the other side, because the other side doesn't have any of that. Thank goodness, you
That
know.
brings up a very interesting point. With all these new electronics and the microwaves and the delta waves, radio waves, how do the modern electronics affect those on the other side?
Well, they can utilize them in an electronic way like they always have, so they can scramble stuff. But it definitely, it is harder. They can be, even if you look at the paranormal
Hmm.
shows, they're looking at their gadgets, and the spirits are standing right in front of them, and they're missing the messages and the shadows and, the signs that they're getting right in front of them.
Yeah,
So I
that's
laugh.
yeah, that's because that doesn't create the ambience that viewers want to see.
Yeah, they need something that's making a loud noise and
Exactly.
shining all these lights.
Because at the end of the day, 99.99999 of these so-called reality paranormal shows are anything but. And no matter what the show is on TV, you have to sustain ratings. If you don't sustain ratings, you're gone.
Absolutely. This is why I have no television show. I've been asked to sign on several times over, but
Hmm.
part of the contract always states, if it's not exciting enough, we're going to script it.
Yep.
Nope, not going to happen in my world.
I was a consultant for a number of years with the TV show Creepy Canada, and one thing that I respect a lot from Brian O'Day, who was the executive producer, Bill Burke, who was the director, it was non-scripted. And if there was a script,
Perfect.
it had to be correct. There was no embellishment. There were no shaky night camera shots. It was done professionally. And
I love that.
yeah.
And that's the way that it should be. Unfortunately, even paranormal investigating and sometimes even mediumship
Hmm.
is a lot like watching paint dry. It's not so
Exactly.
exciting.
Yeah, just like police work. There isn't a crime solved every 44
Every 24
minutes. Yeah,
hours.
exactly. It
No.
doesn't work like that. I remember many of cool nights sitting in a car doing surveillance.
Or paperwork,
Boring.
right?
Oh
Or
gosh,
paperwork.
paperwork. Yeah.
That's not exciting either.
Nope.
And that's where, when Teresa Caputo and the Long Island Medium came out
Hmm.
on television, and still today everybody thinks, I'm going to be running around the grocery store giving free readings, instead of buying my coffee and my eggs. And it's so baffling that TV really kind of re-describes the role of, whether it's law
Yeah.
enforcement, ambulance drivers, 911 operators, or what have you.
Hmm.
And that's what we associate being real and true. And that's kind of scary.
Well, the difference between Caputo and yourself is that when she's doing her groceries, she's usually followed around by a camera crew because they're getting footage for her next show. And
Well,
you are
pardon.
just a down-to-earth, hard-working, honest person who is there helping people and helping spirits.
Thank you. I was going, and yeah, and I'm the one that's pulling the coupons out of my
Hey,
purse.
listen, my wife and I are Groupon's biggest customers.
It's great. Why pay full price? But yeah, it's true. And I laugh, especially when, and I'm ruining reality television for people, but because I have done some television, but when you go to talk to a complete stranger and
Hmm.
they're on camera, they're not a complete stranger. They have to sign a release
Yep.
form before anything is done. So there is no surprises. It might be a surprise to the person, but it's not a surprise to the background producers and such. There is no spontaneous. I'm an English major. Spontaneity. With regards to, I can get this.
I know you
With
can.
regards to, I know you were supporting me over there
I am.
with television.
Mhm.
Unless you're the 8 o'clock news,
Yep.
or the 6 o'clock news or what have you. So it just doesn't happen. And it's interesting because I always look at the other side as to how they're comparing, reality television, and they're over there going, this is what they're basing what we're doing on. Is this really? They're a little bit judgmental in heaven, going, really?
And you
Could
can't blame
somebody?
them. You can't blame them, really. Listen,
No.
the time has come when you and I must say so long for tonight. But like I said, we're going to have you back on because I still had so many questions to talk to you about. I wanted to ask you more about your book that's entitled A Journey to the Afterlife. So do me a favor, come back again and visit us soon.
I'd love to. Thank you so much.
I want to thank you ever so much and let our listeners know how they can find out more about you and how they can get your books.
Oh, books. Yeah, I'm on Amazon, Books A Million, any place books are sold. And my website is KRISTYRobinette.com.
KRISTY, take care of yourself. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us here in the X Zone. And the next time you're speaking to somebody from the other side, let them know that there's another human who respects them. And I highly respect the work that you do. I'll be back on the other side of this break, X Zone Nation, as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in beautiful Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. If you'd like to find out more about the X Zone radio show with yours truly, Rob McConnell, visit our website at www.xzoneradiotv.com. I'll be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away.